Okay, so can you see it says align IRS in the scratch pad? And actually it says align IRS here, so we can clear the message, so then we get rid of the little message icon there. And we have to manually press align IRS. And now the alignment will complete. If you do not press that button, the alignment will never complete. Okay, and after 10 minutes you'll get the little, I believe it is 10 minutes, you'll get the little flashing IRS align amber on the overhead. You know, those little solid lights, they'll flash. And the reason you have to do this is you basically have to tell the FMS, hey, I want you to align off the position that I told you where the airport is. Right, let's talk about that a bit more. So we told it we're at East Mids and we're going to Gatwick, and the IRS, it's nice for it to have a sort of start position, and we're basically saying we're there, yes please align the IRS on that position. That's what we're doing. Okay, older A319s, 20s, they have exactly the same system. It's just not the same as other A320 products that are in the simulator now. It doesn't mean it's wrong, it's just that's the way they used to do it in Airbus, and they do it with the A300 and the other A300 family aircraft. That's how it's done, and that's how it's done on all the 320s. You have to click the align IRS or it will never ever 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 align. Okay, and that's normally the main reason issues, the problem people have with the alignment. So you have to make sure they're in align, or nav I should say, showing the align. You have the city paired put in and you click align. You can't just put that and then it will say align IRS. You obviously need to go from somewhere to somewhere for it to know where it needs to align on. So you need that in the FMS for it to align as well. Okay, makes sense? Sort of, yeah? Okay, good. So let's move on. So we've done the init, we've done the flight plan, we've done the secondary flight plan. Now let's do the init Bravo. So they call it the init B page. How do we get to that page? Can you see this little arrow up there? This means that there is another page. So let's look at a mode page. So on mode page there isn't another arrow, so we know there's no other page. So if we click next page, see, nothing happens. Okay, on the init page, if we click this next page button, surprise surprise, it takes you to the next page. And Airbus also talk about this like you're turning the page on a book. I don't know why they got so obsessed with books and scrolling and barrels and things. I don't know. I really don't know. But it's the way that they describe it in the FCOM. Now, this page looks fairly similar, okay, I think, to the more modern Airbus types. Again, every time you take a shot, if you drink that, you'll be plastered by the end of this video. Or the end of this series. Well, saying that, it's spread after about 9 hours, so you'll probably be okay. Anyway, let's move from the top left to the bottom. So top left to the bottom, top right to the bottom. Taxi. What's this? Well, it's how much fuel the aircraft is assuming you're going to use to taxi. And this is an assumed figure. What do I mean by assumed figure? It's a figure that the aircraft is like, this is how much it always uses. It doesn't. So if you're in Madrid, which is quite a long taxi, it's not going to be more, okay? And if it's like we are in East Mids, where it's a short taxi, it's not going to be any less. You can type in a figure, so you can type in 0.2, like this, and then it will take 200 kilos, or you can put back in the original figure. So you can change that on flight plans. Sometimes it has different values, okay? But yeah, so you can change that, okay? Alright, so moving on to the next, we've got trip/time. So this will be populated with the trip fuel time, route reserve will come back to, alternate fuel will come back to, final time will come back to, and extra time will come back to. So like I say, we are moving from the top left to here, but we will come back to this section here. Block. So this is how much fuel the plane has when you're on the stand, okay, when you leave. How much fuel we're going to have when we push back. It's called block fuel generally, and that's normally the number that you see on your flight plan. Okay, so you've got the zero fuel weight, which is the zero fuel weight, your takeoff gross weight, your takeoff weight is your landing weight, which is what it assumes it's going to land at. You've got your center of gravity, you've got your maximum flight level, optimal flight level, cruise flight level, and obviously the cruise flight level is taken from the init A page. Well, this is all kind of blank. How do we fill this out? So can you see the block fuel has the FOB next to it? That's how much fuel is on board right now. And it actually shows you that as a figure, so you can copy it across. but we're going to do it the way that this is how I program the aircraft, and it's actually the easiest way. So for your convenience, we've actually made a pop-out. So if you click, see how my arrow changes. So anywhere on the screen, you get this really quite nice pop-out. Okay, it's actually a really, really useful feature. So what I do is I pop it out, and then I move over to the EFB. So let's join me over by the EFB. Okay, so here we are over at the EFB. Now, obviously you can do the stuff on the EFB and manually just type it in across if this sort of breaks your immersion a bit by popping it out. I understand that. You know, manually typing figures in is more immersive than using a pop-out, but this is the most convenient way to do it. So, there are two ways to do it, okay? There's I would say the more advanced way to do it, and the simpler way to do it. We're going to start with the more advanced way, and then we're going to move on to the more simpler way, okay? So, where do we go? So, this is a ground ops menu. So we move our cursor to ground ops. Now, there's two things on here. Load manager, load sheet. What's the difference? The load manager is the simpler way to do it. The load sheet is the more complicated way to do it. Okay. The final page of the load manager is the load sheet. Right, so if you use the load manager, you're going to end up on the load sheet anyway. If you don't want to use the load manager, you can jump straight to the load sheet. Okay, so as I said, we're going to start with the more advanced user, and then we're going to go back to the simpler user. Okay, so let's go to the load sheet. So what are we looking at here? On the left, we have a load of figures. So this is just basically like figures from the FCOM. So our dry operating weight, so we weigh the minimum that we can weigh with no fuel, no cargo, just me and a packet of crisps, is 90 tons. Maybe I weigh a bit, so let's say 90.1, let's be kind. Right, so anyway, whatever. So 90 tons is the empty weight of the aeroplane. The DOCG, dry operating weight, center of gravity, so the center of gravity of the plane when it sits here with nothing in is 35%. And this gives you all the maximum figures. So maximum takeoff weight, maximum landing weight, maximum zero fuel weight, payload is dash dash because we don't know what the payload is, and the mass per passenger assumed is 84.5 kilos, which obviously isn't that useful because we're a cargo plane, but these are just reference figures for you, okay? So if it says like, oh, you're over the maximum zero fuel weight, you think, well, what is the maximum zero fuel weight? Well, it's 130. It's because it's written there on the left. That's why it's in yellow, because it's kind of like an indication. Green is like it's been drawn across from the configuration of this aircraft. Hence why it's called the configuration box. Okay, so this is using sort of, like I said, I know we've gone through the EF before. This is the modern Airbus colours: the blue, the green, the yellow, the amber, the magenta, all that sort of stuff. Anyway, so I'm an advanced user now. Okay, well, I'm saying I'm an advanced user as if like I am, but I'm just pretending that I am for this point. So, one thing to note, see it has GPS primary. That's because the GPS has become primary because the IRS alignment is almost completed now. So we can clear that message. And please note how it says page 3 of 3. Okay, remember I said that the last page of the load manager is the load sheet. Even though we clicked on this and it says it's page 3 of 3, don't be confused. You haven't missed 2 pages. We're just jumping to the end. So a lot of you use custom flight plans. Now your flight plan might say, the zero fuel weight is the zero fuel weight is 110 tons. Okay, so all you have to do is type 110, enter, and your flight plan might say, it will actually take 16.8 tons of fuel, enter. Okay, then you click load, fuel and payload. You can see the plane kind of judders. Done. Simple as that. So your zero fuel weight has automatically been made to be 110 tons. Your center of gravity has been optimized and it's distributed the load to give you a 30.1% center of gravity, and it's automatically loaded on 16.8 tons. So you can see our FOB figure is 16.8. Yeah? We've just been given the nav accuracy upgrade message. That's because the alignment has now completed. Okay? And you can see now that that's happened. So let's just review what just happened there. So I typed in 110, I typed in 16.8, and remember you type it in and then click enter. Okay, So if I re-enter the box, see, I can keep typing, and if I click that, it's going to tell me, oh, that's outside of the range, okay? So now it's 110, I click enter, I type my figure in, and then I click enter, and then you click load fuel and payload, okay? Now it's loaded it on. So you can see the aircraft kind of moves when you load it because it's physically loading the aircraft with the payload or the fuel or whatever, and it distributes it automatically to give you a optimized CFG. A few people have asked us, please can you make it so I can edit the CFG to be non-optimal? Well, the issue that we have there is you're then, for most users, they just want an optimized CFG, okay? And then the whole point in the real world is you don't call up the loadmaster and say, hey, can you specifically load it so I use more fuel? They don't do that. And they don't say, hey, can you specifically load it so I have a really, really aft CFG? It doesn't happen. They try and bring it as neutral as possible, okay? So that's why this system is being as accurate as possible to distribute the load. It won't always be 30. You know, if you're at the extremes, it will go forward and aft a bit to try and keep it within the range that we're required. So unfortunately, the short answer is no. But the long answer is you can if you really want to, okay? We're going to cover two topics here, okay? So we'll finish this off, and then we will come back to the center of gravity question, okay? Right. So we're done. We're an advanced user. We looked at our flight plan. It said we need a zero fuel weight of 110, and it said we need 16.8 tons of fuel. Great. We typed it in. We clicked enter. Done. Good to go. And then what you can do is you can copy these figures across. So we could type in 16.8, enter, 110, enter, 30.1, enter, and then that's it. This is why these boxes are displayed here, because they're the ones that you need to type in. We're not giving you information you don't need, we're giving you information that you need. So let's imagine we're not an advanced user and we want to try and do it the simpler way. And there's nothing wrong with the simpler way. I'm not saying if you're not an advanced user that you're any lesser than the other one. It's just different people like doing it different ways, and generally the people who have the flight plans are the ones that don't want to do it the way we're just going to show you. They kind of just want to do it this way. It's not any worse or any better. We've just given people the option to do it both ways. That's the best way to look at it. So we can clear, and we'll click return. So now we're going to use the load manager. Now the load manager, it's fairly similar. So we still have done whatever calculation, because unfortunately we can't tell you how much fuel you're going to need for your flight. Obviously you're going to have to work that out on your own. So total fuel on board, we can just put 16.8, and this is, you can type in 16.8, enter. So you can type it in. I saw people saying you can't type it in. You can. Look, I'll do it again. So let's say 22. Okay, so you can. You just have to type it in. So the box goes green, which means you're editing it. Delete what you want. 16.8. Enter. Bingo. You can't drag these around. Now you say, well, why can't I drag these around? We're trying to make it as simple as possible. Okay, we're trying to just say, I want to put this fuel in, I want to go. That's why. Now there was a fair bit of discussion about why can I not fill up the trim tank. Okay, so you can see the trim tank here at the tail. Okay, it's displayed as a fuel tank. There is a procedure that is very, very rarely used on the A300 that you can fill the trim tank with fuel and depart with it full. Okay, and this is something we did not model. I mean, you can fill the fuel tank. I'm going to show you in a minute how, if you really, really want to do this, how you can fill it up and use the fuel to get that extra range. But we asked all of the A300 pilots that have flown the aircraft, and I said, how many times have you departed with fuel in the trim tank? And they all said, never. And they've actually, some of them have had it where captains have refused to do this procedure because it's so prone to going wrong for many reasons. One of them is it makes the center of gravity quite unstable and is prone to tipping the aircraft. So normally they have to put an aircraft stand at the back to stop it from tipping, to fuel it, which obviously becomes complicated in the sim. And also it means that you have a lot of fuel that you're relying on using that is in the tank, that if you don't use it, you won't be able to make it where you're going. So that's quite a risk to take. So I know that people want to think of this as a wide-body long haul. It is not. It is not. These aircraft are flying short haul to medium haul ranges, okay, with a useful load. It can fly across the Atlantic, but it's not got much stuff in it, and they never do it. And they never really ever use this filling the trim tank up to try and get that extra range that they need. It's just not something that happens, and that is why we did not include it in the aircraft. You can even see that we have the fuel tank displayed there in the tail. We know it's there, we know that you could fill it, but it actually, for most users, if you load the aircraft incorrectly, it tips on its tail, because we modeled the aircraft that it has a correct center of gravity, and it just tips on its tail, and it all becomes very complicated. So that's why we haven't done it. I will show you a workaround. I know it is not the most ideal situation, but if you are one of those people that want to use it, this is a way to do it. Okay, I'll show you in a minute. We'll come back to it. Again, that links into the center of gravity thing. But again, back to what this page is about. You simply type the amount of fuel in, or you use the slider. So this is the only slider that works. See, the rest that don't have a little box that goes around it. You type in the fuel. Okay, you join me on the outside of the aircraft. So we're going to talk about how to fill that trim tank and the sort of dangers associated with it. So unfortunately, the only way at the moment to do this is to use the inbuilt X-Plane weight and balance menu. As you can hear, I've got the APU running at the moment to give us some AC power for the interior. So first of all, let's have a look how we use this menu. So click on flight, and then we'll have edit weight and balance. This brings us to a menu here where it's obviously a lot more silent because it's paused the external sounds of the outside. Here we're going to need to do a few little things to kind of edit the aircraft. So payload wise, we need to work out what our payload is, probably on a flight like this, let's say 20 tons. Total internal fuel, we will need to put all the fuel up, and the tank that you need to make sure, this one here, tank 4, is the trim tank. So you can fill the trim tank all the way up, and you'll see that obviously associated all the other trim tanks, center tank, fuel figures associated. You can't edit these as much as you want. They're all relatively linked. This is due to the internal optimized fuel spread calculation. But in this mode, what you can do is you can indeed just whack all the fuel up. So we now have the absolute maximum amount of fuel, including fuel tank 4, which has got full. Now the issue is, if I click done and I click apply, the aircraft is going to tip on its tail. It will, I can tell you that for a fact. So what we need to do is we need to edit this value here to about minus 80 centimeters or inches, whichever customary unit you're using. So I'm going to use negative 84, something like that. I'm going to click done, I'm going to click apply. It's going to get quite loud, and you can see how the aircraft is loaded, but it has not tipped on its tail. So now we have a completely full aircraft with fuel in the trim tank. Let's have a look at that from the inside. Okay, you can see here we've got fuel in the trim tank and all the other fuel tanks are filled up, and we've got a centre of gravity of 30.4. If you're not sure how much to adjust that unit, I would adjust it till you get into around the 30.4, 30.2 range, having a look at the C of G value shown on this screen here, so you can adjust it because this is the live value of the centre of gravity. So let me just what happens from an external point of view if we just loaded the aircraft without that centre of gravity change from the loading menu. Okay, so here we are again. I've just set the fuel all the way to full with no centre of gravity change, so let's see what happens. And there you go, you can see it really trying to tip. It's not going to quite go, but that's obviously too far of an aft centre of gravity in a reasonably dangerous position. Taxiing out the aircraft would be fairly difficult, and takeoff would be out of the safe range for the INI A300. So this is the reason why we do this, and if we adjust the centre of gravity just a little bit the other way, so something like this, you can see that even the smallest little bit of change it's going to tip, and now it's basically going to just keep going and going and going until it falls onto its tail. Now what would happen is this would actually happen when we filled out all the fuel tanks using the optimized loads default. So again, this is why we didn't do it, and this is why this is a workaround method to get that to work, and we do not sanction it basically. But if you want to use it, this is the way to do it, but we're not going to certify basically that the systems are all going to work exactly as they should do with that trim tank 100% full. But if you need it, this is how you do it. And what you're looking at right now is the exact reason why we don't want to try and encourage it for a normal fuel load, and that's why it's not included on the EFB menu. So, and again, one thing to note, please don't edit the values on the EFB after you've used this menu, because it will reset them and you'll lose all the fuel. You click next, and then you end up on this page, cargo page, fairly similar. So the total, we basically just set how much cargo we want, and it's automatically distributed. So I want maximum. That would be a bit too much. I believe it would put us over the maximum zero fuel weight, and it would warn us of that. But we can look at our flight plan, or look at whatever piece of information, or we just happen to think, oh, you know, I want 20 tons. I want 20 tons. All right, done. And it just distributes it automatically throughout the aircraft. Okay, and you don't have to click load. You can just click next, and now it brings us to the flight plan page. And it's automatically run the calculation, you see, and we're pretty close. Remember, last time I typed in manually 110, well, 109.6. I was trying to go for 110, pretty close, but not quite. And it's distributed it automatically 30.1, 16.8 is the same as before, and then we just type these figures in. So let's actually type the figures in now. So we type in 16.8, 109.6, and now the takeoff weight automatically calculates because it knows how much fuel is on board, and the landing weight automatically populates because it knows how much fuel we're going to use. Center of gravity 30.1, like this, and there we go. So the information that's displayed on this page is the information that we need to type in to the iniB page. That's why we're only displaying what you need, not useless information. Okay, so why do we have to type the zero fuel weight in? And if you are familiar with modern aircraft, family aircraft, ooh, that phrase again, it is very, very, very important that you type the zero fuel weight in on those aircraft, because the fly-by-wire system uses the center of gravity figure to do calculations. And if you depart without it filled in, I'm not going to say it's not going to fly. It will fly fine because it does its own calculation in the air aerodynamically, but it's not going to be very happy. It's going to give you warnings on takeoff. It's going to give you warnings all the time that, hey, you didn't type it in, I really need this, I want this. It won't give you proper calculations. It won't give you proper predictions. It's very important. With the A300, it isn't that important at all. It's only used for the fuel trim tank system. So the trim tanks, I think we talked about them, I can't even remember now, in the fuel episode on the overhead, has the CGCC, the Center of Gravity Control Computer. Now it needs a reference of the center of gravity, and that's where it gets it from. It gets it from the zero fuel weight C of G that you entered here. And we can see, so let's just have a look at the bottom of the ND. So here we're looking at the bottom of the ND, and you can see we have the 30.1, they both match. So you can see that the zero fuel weight C of G matches the center of gravity that is, it's the center of gravity that's put into the FMS, matches the center of gravity that's shown on the display here. So this is where the CGCC is going to take its value and edit it to try and bring it further aft. I'm not going to go into that now. I'm pretty sure we talked about that in the fuel lesson on the overhead. But yeah, that's the only thing that's used for. It's not used for anything else. There is actually an operational dispatch where you can basically fly this aircraft around with no FMS. So it says you don't need to type that in. In the aircraft that don't have a trim tank, but then the ones that you do need to fill it in. So just so the system works. So it's really not used for all that much. So let's go back to the EFB. Alright, so that's basically it. Like I said, there's an easier way with the sliders, and there's a more advanced way to do it if you have access to flight plans, or if you just don't really want to be bothered with it. You just want to say, oh, around about this zero fuel weight and around about this amount of fuel, automatically load it to me, done. So once you've done this and you have the load sheet by either means, by going straight to the page or by using the load manager, you can send this data to the takeoff performance. So see, so I've clicked send to takeoff, and now it's automatically filled in the takeoff weight here. But it's a bit of a, I guess it's a redundancy, or it's we're trying to help as many people out. Some people aren't going to use this button up here. Okay, so that's what that function's there for. What does this button up here do? This button looks at the FMS. And if you filled out your init A and your init B, it goes, okay, so this person's going from East Midlands to London Gatwick Airport, and they're using this runway, and this is their zero fuel weight, and this is how much fuel they've got. It then automatically fills out this whole page for you. So if you click FMC data, see, it's rounded the figure down to 126 because it's taken the figure, as you can see from the FMS, the takeoff weight, see, TOGW. I was pointing at that with my finger, not with the mouse. That doesn't help you, that helps me, but not you. Let's use the mouse, that always helps. So anyway, there's the takeoff weight, so it's gone here, and it's automatically transferred it to here. And it's gone, well, this person's at Echo Golf November X-ray. Yes. Off runway 27. Yes. And now it's told us the elevation, the length, the slope, the entry angle, and the takeoff shift at this time are not there because it's data that we don't have available to us in the sim. And now we have a sort of collection of information that's already done. So if you fill out the FMS in the order I showed you, you can basically go to takeoff page and just go FMC data, boom, and it will just draw all that data across without you having to bother typing it in. And if you are not using Active Sky, you can click ADIS request, boom. Now what we'll do is the sim will look at the weather and it will draw it, and it's now, see, it's getting the ADIS, it's reading the ADIS, it's transferring it into a format that it can read, boof, and it automatically inserts that into this page. So it's given us a wind of 210 at 10, makes sense, from runway 27, temperature of 17 degrees, pretty good for this time of year. Automatically picked up the QNH as 1023, dry, off. Now we have to edit everything that's in grey. Is it dry? Yes. Anti-ice, off? Yeah, why not? Alright, so let's talk a little bit about the configurations and what we're going to choose. So we're going to use 15.0, that's what it defaults to. A lot of operators use 15.15, and that's fine, but we don't have, we have a lot of data available with our data package that we use, but it's more of a generic data package. So operators normally use data cards that they have custom made from Airbus for their each airport, but we've had to use a more generic function. These are all real figures which are from Airbus, so they're not wrong, they're just a bit higher than a lot of people might be used to expecting to see, but they are still real figures. But what it means is, if you want to use 15.15, for example, on say a 3,500 meter runway, it's going to tell you, sorry, I don't have the data available, please use 15.0. Same thing as if I try and use 15.20, so the highest flap setting for takeoff. Obviously, in reality, you could use 15.20 on a 3,000 meter runway, because it clearly will be able to be takeoff. But we don't have the data available. So it's going to tell us, let's just wait for it to compute, no takeoff data, use flaps 15.0. So it's saying I don't have the data available, please use 15.0, I do have the data available. So if we do that and we use 15.0, bingo, we have all the data available. Okay, I know it's not the most ideal situation, but simply if the numbers don't exist, they don't exist, because we can't use these individual calculations that airlines have asked for each airport, because there's too many airports in the world, and then certain airports would have more accurate data than other airports. We need a solution that goes across every airport, which is what we have here. Okay, so what's it telling us now? It's given us runway 27, our takeoff weight is 126 tons, our maximum takeoff weight performance is 178 tons, 178.7 tons, so this is the maximum weight that we could physically depart from this runway on. I'm using my finger again, which doesn't help. Use the mouse, there you go. And it's giving us the V speeds, V1, VR, V2. And it's giving us the flex temperature, and it's telling us the flaps that we're using, and it's telling us the trim. So this is pretty advanced. It's given us a lot of information, and this is laid out exactly like the real world calculators, okay? So this isn't some sort of format that we've made up. This is really spot on to what you would see on the line. So limitation, what does this mean? Second segment and runway. So it means that the second segment climb gradient, the second segment bit, that's the limiting factor, and that's why it's up the V2 speed, so that's a bit higher. I'm not going to go through these crazily amount, we'll be here all day. This is an FMS tutorial. Runway means that the runway length is a limiting factor. Okay, let's not go more forward than that. Trim, it's how much trim we need to set. What we can do, which is very cool, is if we go on the takeoff page here, we can click send data. It says, do you want to send the data to the FMS? I do want to send the data. Send. And can you see we get received takeoff company data message, and what it does is all of this data is automatically transferred. So V1, VR, V2 is not, we'll talk about that. Well, we've already talked about that in the older lessons, but we'll review it. And we have the flex and the trim. So we've already got all of our V speeds in there now, so let's take a look at the PFD. So look, if we look at the PFD, we've got V1 already shown as 158, our VR is already there, and we have the V2 shown at the top that we need to set manually in the FCU. So that send, it isn't, I'm not saying it's not a real feature. You can, in the real world, request your takeoff data via ACARS. So we're kind of simulating that you did the calculations there and then sent it via ACARS. It's not 100% realistic, but it's very convenient. And you don't have to use it. If you don't want to use it because it breaks your immersion, don't use it. That's fine. It's just there for your convenience. One other thing that you can see, let me just move this slightly to the left, is if you look here, let's zoom in slightly. So one other thing you can see that's now working is, can you see the bugs? So these are the manual bugs. So we can see we have the V1 VR speeds are now set automatically, and our green dot speed is automatically set 210 knots, 210 knots. So they're automatically set for us on both sides. So we don't have to do that. Obviously in reality you'd move them with your hand, but this automatically is taken from the speeds that are put into the FMS. So that's already set for us as well. So quick review of the FMS. If you type in the init alpha, init bravo, you can click and then you go on the load sheet or the load manager, depending on how you want to load the aircraft. Finish that off, go onto the takeoff perf page, click FMC data, it draws all the data in, choose an appropriate flap setting, it will tell you if the flap setting is not available, the takeoff data, and if you're not using Active Sky, you can click ADIS request, it will fill out the weather for you, and then you can just simply click compute. Once it's computed, you can click send data and it will send it to the FMS. And all you need to do is make sure you manually set the V2 speed, so 162 knots in our case in the FCU, because it's how the real aircraft works. Okay, we're looking back. I actually just had to adjust the time of day because it's got dark that I've been sitting here so long. I think that puts into perspective how long these tutorials are getting. Stick with us. I know this is long. I know there is a lot of information, but I want to kind of go over the top, because if you're really interested in this, then you'll get everything that you want to get from it. And if you're trying to skim through this, hopefully you can just bear with me when you're thinking, jeez, will this guy ever shut up and get to the point? So hopefully this covers both areas. Okay, so stick with us. I would say we're nearly done, but we're not, because it's pretty complicated. Well, we're over the main part. We've basically programmed the FMS. We have a route, we have our performance, we talked about secondary flight plan. The rest of it is kind of like nice to know stuff, if that makes sense. But it's still pretty complicated. So let's keep going. Where are we going to go next? So let's take a look at this takeoff page while we're looking at it. Obviously all the information is in there, but we can not really anything else to say. V1, VR, V2, the FSO, so the flap speed, S speed, and then the green dot speed. F speed is the point at which you can retract the flaps. S speed is when you can retract the slats. Makes sense. So if we do a flaps 15-0 takeoff, we can't retract the 15 because that's just the slats until we're above S speed. If we do a 15-15 takeoff, then above F we can put them up, because to 15-0 and then wait till above S to go 0. It's exactly the same as a 320. Like, I know I keep saying that. O stands for green dot, which is the minimum clean speed, which is 210 knots, so we can get a good idea of our departure. You know, if you have kind of like a speed constraint in the turn, at this point you can review it and go, am I going to be able to do this standard, or am I going to use a funny flap setting, etc, etc. Runway, thrust reduction, acceleration, and engine out and engine out, thrust reduction, they're all in there. You can change them, remember, from the settings menu in the EFB. Again, I'm pointing at the direction of the EFB. I don't know why with my finger. That doesn't help you guys. It's over there. Something else you can do, you can already, if you want to, I don't really think it's SOP, but you can put in the minima for the arrival. So let's just say it's 400, actually I think it's 710, but it doesn't really matter, we're just going to use that. You can already put the minima in and already look at sort of the landing configuration stuff and the landing weight, 124.6, that makes sense, okay? And yeah, we can already look at that on the ground. quite neat. And that's about it really. Go around, it's fairly similar, but it's just showing you the go around stuff for runway 26, but it doesn't really make sense because we're on the ground. We're in the ground. We're definitely not doing a go around yet, but anyway, you can look at it. So let's have one last look at that iniB page now all the figures are in. Taxi, talked about. Trip fuel, makes sense now, 1.4, 13 minutes. Pretty short flight, yeah. Route reserve. So this is going to be a bit awkward because it's a very small value. I saw people saying this doesn't work correctly. No, it does work right. So 100 kilos is 5% of the trip fuel, alright? So this is a percentage of your trip. So if I say I want 30%, you have to do the slash, okay? I saw people saying it doesn't work. No, you have to do the slash. Now it's 30%, so of the trip gives us 400 kilos. Or we can do 60% or 90%. Yeah? Makes sense? So now our route reserve, which is the sort of amount of fuel you definitely don't want to... It's the amount of fuel that you're taking for things that might go wrong, is 90% of the entire trip fuel. And obviously a 90% route reserve doesn't make any sense. It's normally around about 5%, or it's normally around 15%, I believe, on some sim brief profiles, so 200 kilos. So yeah, that's how that works. Alternate, if you don't put an alternate in, this is obviously not populated, but it's calculating it's going to take 800 kilograms to go from our missed approach to Gatwick Airport. Kind of makes sense, right? It's quite far away, 800 kilos, taking 1.4 tons to get from here to there. Yeah, makes sense. Final slash time. What is this? What does it matter? How does it affect us? This is a standard figure, okay? So there's an amount of fuel on a flight plan that you're not allowed to use. It's there. You always carry it with you for the, oh dear, this has gone very, 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 very wrong moments. And it's 30 minutes of fuel. So can you see it's 2.2 slash 30. So that's 2.2 tons equals 30 minutes. But if you say, no, I actually want 45 minutes, then it calculates it as 3. So let's say we wanted 2 tons. You have to do 2.0 slash, okay, because it doesn't know if it wants minutes or whatever. Then you'd have 27 minutes, which is actually below 30 minutes. You actually wouldn't be allowed to leave with this, okay? But you could say I want 2.5 slash. But you see, these all edits. People told me it doesn't work. It does work. You just have to type it in correctly. So 0.3 slash, for example. Yeah? Okay. And it calculates the percentage of what that is. So it does work. It does work. You just have to... It's a bit weird, kind of how you type it in. Extra time. You can't edit this figure, just like the real thing. It's how much extra fuel. So we have 11.4 tons extra, which is quite a lot. And that's 2 hours 35 minutes. So we could arrive at our arrive and hold for 2.5 hours and then still have enough fuel to do the missed approach and have our extra 30 minutes. So we've got massive amount of fuel on board compared to what we need. It's just we're taking a lot because it's a tutorial, can have the engines running, can do go-arounds, can do diversions, etc, etc. So it's fine. Block, we talked about zero fuel weight, we talked about takeoff weight, we talked about landing weight, we talked about zero fuel weight CFG, and then this is the maximum flight level, the optimum flight level, and the cruise flight level. I had a bit of criticism about this optimum flight level calculation being stupid because 350 doesn't make sense. Correct, doesn't make sense. That's how it works. I have specifically seen it on modern Airbus family aircraft going from a 40-minute flight, and it says, oh, you can go up to flight level 340 if you want. I can, but that's dumb. So no. So yes, this figure seems weird and it's not that useful, but that's how it works. Unfortunately, it doesn't really have that much brains in it. It obviously doesn't take into account that it's trying to do a cruise for a while, but yeah, and it's saying you can go up to 390. Well, that makes sense because we're very, very light. So yeah, that's how those figures work, and that's where they come from. And that's it. So we looked at the iniB page. Let's finally move on to a new page. Let's go on to the mode page. Now, you heard me take a bit of a, like a breath, or a breathe, or a nose breathe, the way you want to say it. This is going to be confusing. This is very confusing and is a very odd way of doing things. Now, it might be because I don't truly understand other aircraft types, Very well could be the point. But for me, these pages are odd, and the way that it works is very odd. So, it says econ climb, cost index, at destination, econ, min fuel, min time, des forecast. What's that mean? Cost index, obviously it's the cost index that we typed in. At destination, it's saying we're going to get there at 17:43 GMT. Throwback to how old this plane is, that it doesn't use UTC, it says it GMT. But little trick for you. I think they renamed GMT, Greenwich Mean Time, to Universal Time Coordinated. Love the French that they can't even use Universal Coordinated Time, it's Universal Time Coordinated. Nice. Just a bit of a off track there. And it estimated fuel on board is how much fuel is estimated for the arrival. Okay. So this is if we use the econ preset. Econ is like I'm taking my figures from the FMS. If we use the min fuel preset, it doesn't really change much, but you can see that the time is quite a bit bigger, because this is if you use cost index 0. Okay, so even though the cost index stays the same, it's going to use cost index 0, and it tells you the time difference and the fuel difference. Minimum time doesn't really make much of a difference, because it's trying to work out for these short flights, it can't really speed up to slow down enough to make a significant difference. And in the air, these make more sense than the ground predictions, because you'll see minimum time, it just speeds up and goes as fast as it can. And minimum fuel, it slows down to cost index 0 to try and go as slow as it can to save fuel. So if you low on fuel, you think, oh my god, I'm going to hold or whatever, you get min fuel and it will go into the min fuel mode. And this is in the climb, right? So these modes change as you go through the flight, so like cruise, descent, blah blah blah. So it's kind of a bit confusing, okay? But I think these will make more sense in the air. We've covered it a bit, let's move on. Okay, now we're on the Tacked Mode page. So remember I was saying these get confusing. So mode kind of makes sense, or it's Tacked Mode. We're going to do a bit of an in-depth explanation now, not that anything we've done so far has not been in-depth. It's what this system is, why does it exist, and how can we use it. So in flight, if we want to increase our airspeed, so let's say ATC say, INI A300, please increase airspeed to 295 knots and maintain 295 knots in the cruise. If we select 295, all of our automatic profile mode, so our VNAV and stuff, gets disconnected automatically, because you cannot have a selected speed and a managed mode. Okay, so you cannot have the little speed window, you controlling it, and the aircraft controlling the VNAV. Right? It's not possible in this aircraft. That's correctly modelled. You either have one or the other. So then you say to yourself, well, that's very inconvenient, because if the ATC has told us to speed up, I still want to use it in cruise or in descent, whatever. Okay, you can, using the Tacked Mode page. So can you see we have econ, max climb, and a speed window. So if we click max climb, this climbs at cost index 0, basically like maximum amount of climb rate. So if they say exploit climb, you can go on Tacked Mode, maximum climb, and it will accelerate. It will aim for green dot speed, which give it the maximum climb rate, and it will just climb as quick as possible, basically. But you have to remember to put it back into econ, because it won't do it itself. You have to remember to do that, otherwise it will mess up your whole flight. So remember in our scenario where they said 295 knots, you can type 295 in here. Now I've seen people say, oh, it doesn't work. Okay, you're nearly there. You now have to select it. So can you see it gets bigger? So now it's selected. Okay, now it will do 295 knots. If you go back to econ, now it won't. Now it will. Now it won't. Now it will. Okay, makes sense. I cleared it now, so we can go back to econ, so it won't screw up the whole flight. But we'll look at that when we're in the air. Okay, so the number that you type in there is the number it will climb at, but please, please, please remember to go back to econ, because it means that it won't respect any of the constraints or any of this sort of stuff, and it gets very messy. But why does this system exist? Now, I couldn't get a clear answer from any of our source material, but I have a theory. Might be wrong, might be right. I hope if anyone, not that they will be, if anyone has ever really worked on this aircraft or truly knows it on an engineering level, please leave a comment. Like, I find it fascinating the more that we can learn about this aircraft. That I think what it is, the processing power in this aircraft is so low that if you have the speed selected, so me the pilot, I'm controlling the airspeed, and I say, oh, actually I want the speed to be 280 knots. So if you ask for another airspeed, it has to recalculate the entire VNAV profile on the descent because it's using a different speed, so the calculation is different. It just can't do that. It just goes no, because it takes, apparently in the real aircraft the VNAV was absolutely useless even at the best of times, and it took very, very long time to do any sort of calculations. So I think that this was kind of a halfway house, that you type it in and then it's running the calculation in the background, and when it's happy it will do it. So it's kind of like only doing what it wants to do it when it's ready to do it, rather than you selecting the speed all the time and winding up and down, and it just cannot cope with that amount of calculations that are needed. I think that's where it comes from. It's a very strange system all the same. You can also type in a Mac if you want, so you can type in 7.8 like this and it will do Mac upon 7.8. Okay. So this is what this mode is, tack mode. Obviously we're in climb, you'll have tack cruise, tack descent, it's the same thing. But yeah, the mode page, you don't really ever use it. Tack mode, you can use it reasonably often if you're on the network and you know someone tells you to speed up or slow down and you don't want to go out of profile mode, then you can use this. But yeah, that's basically tacked mode. Very odd pages if I'm honest. So let's move on to progress. Progress page, this actually looks fairly similar to a modern aircraft, Airbus family aircraft. Someone take a shot, I've not said it for a while. So what are we looking at here? We've got cruise, max, opt, same data from the other page. It's the max flight level, the optimum and our current cruise, as we said, where it gets those figures from. Bearing distance 2, so often a lot of operators put in the runway, so you can do this. So our runway there, and it's 1 mile and a bearing of this, makes sense. We can change this to whatever we want in flight. This is our current position. This button doesn't do anything, it doesn't update, because like I said we have GPS primary. Tells us our distance to destination, and this is the only place that you can see. So on the flight plan page, see, it doesn't tell us how many miles we have to go. On the progress page, it does tell us how many miles, and this is the flight plan distance. So it's 264 miles, okay? So if we go on here and I type in Echo Golf Whiskey, see, it's 104. So the straight line distance from where this aircraft's parked straight to there is 148 miles. But because of our arrival and departure, it's 264 miles. Okay. We've already talked about auto tuning and VORs and all that sort of stuff when we look back at the lesson, where you can see the VOR window and the course window here. But let's do a quick review, okay? Because I don't want people to have to go back watch hours of footage skipping through it to try and find it. But you can see it's automatically tuning Tango November Tango and Tango November Tango. Kind of makes sense because remember it's part of our departure. We're going to Trent, as they call it. But you can type in whatever you want. Now this is pretty smart for the 80s, right? I know I say that a lot, but it is pretty sophisticated. So I want to actually have Compton, Charlie, Papa, Tango, boom. And it's tuned Compton for me on the VOR, okay? 11435. And it's R, which stands for like remote tuning, so it's tuned itself. You can clear it, it'll do it itself. It should go back to the auto tuning, and there we go, back to Tango November Tango. Now if I change this switch here to VOR, and now you can see that the VOR display is populated with the frequency that's from there, and it actually takes 4.5 seconds for that screen to populate. Again, I have seen people pressing that button and oh, they didn't even model the VOR thing. Like, we did. We just modeled it. So it takes a while, okay? 4 seconds, roughly, for that window to go from dashed to populated, because it needs to kind of hand over from the FMS to the VOR system. There's a bit of a delay because it's slow. So just give it a bit of time. So now what you can do is you can see, like, look, what I'm changing on here changes on here, so I can manually tune a VOR. So let's try that. Alright, so I've pressed N to bring up my X-plane map, and I know it's obvious what the frequency is because I can see it on the other side, but 115.7, so we're going to manually set that, okay? So let's close the map. 115.7, so we've manually tuned it, and we can manually put our course of whatever we want in there. Okay, so now we've manually tuned this VOR, but we're taking control, so it says M here. So let's have a look at our Dme Reader. Okay, so in this view what we can see here is we can see the, they call it the, I think it's DD-RMI, or just we'll call it the RMI. It's basically the older school VOR indicator. We can see that DME1 and DME2 show 18 and 18. So remember we said that on VOR2 it's automatically tuning Tango November Tango, and that's saying it's 18 miles away. Well, that makes sense, okay, that we've manually tuned it on the left and it's saying, oh yeah, it's also 18 miles. Well, good, because they should both be 18 miles. And you can see that both of these needles, which are physically modelled, are pointing like this, see? Like that. So it makes sense. And there's Tango November Tango over there. So that makes sense. But what we can see as well is, yeah, so that basically makes sense, that we can see that it's pointing towards the right thing, both arrows are pointing towards the right thing, and we have the same DME. And you can manually tune VORs as you fly along to your heart's content. And also, you can manually lock onto VORs, rather than in other Airbus modern aircraft types we can't do it. The switch has to be in VOR. If you press the VOR lock button, you get VOR in blue, and it will manually select the course that you've put in that VOR window. And you can fly from VOR to VOR all the way across the United Kingdom or across the world if you want to, and just fly like a 727. You don't even need the FMS if you don't want to, which is very cool actually, but we're not going to show that today because it's not really what it's about. But let's put it back to auto tune. So to return the system to automatic like functionality, we click it back to nav and we wait 3 or 4 seconds, and it should automatically, when we look back down, be blanked, so a dash 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 in the screen, and also automatically tuning the most appropriate nav. So here we are back again, and you can see they're both automatically tuned to there, and obviously the same thing that we did on this side goes for the same on the other side. You can manually tune it, press the VOR button, and it will do what it needs to do. That's about it from the progress page. There's not much else to show on here. The engine out page, we didn't model it. It doesn't do anything at this time. The Direct 2 page, we're going to show that in the air, because if you do Direct 2s on the ground, it can cause all manner of chaos. And I think we're pretty close to the end there. So why don't we just try and do a wind uplink. Okay. So it's going to now search for the winds at this level, because we've told it. ACARS wind received, insert wind. So here are the different winds for the levels. Like I say, if you're using Active Sky, this will not work. Alright, so that's done. So now we have our winds in as well. And that's basically it for the FMS. We have the brightness knobs on this side and that side. Okay, we can see both FMSs now, so final sort of closing thoughts and what we need to talk about with these is they're independent of each other, the FMSs, so you can be on this page and I can be on this page, and you can do this and I can do that. The only pages that are linked are the flight plan pages, so if you scroll on one it will scroll on the other, but they are fully independent. You know, I can be on this, I can be on that one, I can be on this one, I can be on that one. See, they're not linked together, which is nice. And the very final thing we're going to look at now, we're obviously going to look at it in the air. We should have mentioned it when we got to that page, but it's good to just go over it now. It's sort of FMS in landing configuration, because it's going to be a very, very short flight. How do you set the minima? We already put that in. Or what does it mean? And how do you do a different flap configuration for landing? Okay, so at this time 30-40 is selected, which is the standard. And it automatically has a wind correction of 5 knots. We can change the wind correction if we want, and it will obviously change the VAP, the V approach speed, but the standard is 5, and it gives you the V approach speed of 140 knots. If we select 15-20, it gives us a higher VAP, because this is for the 15-20 landing. So we have to select this in the FMS if we want to do a flaps 15-20 landing, and we also have to select this. So I've seen a few people do landings where they get too low flaps, very late. I think it's about 800 feet it happens. That's because this switch needs to be in the 1520 position, and this needs to be here. So this tells the FMS, hey, I'm doing a 1520 landing. So it goes, oh, okay, so this must be your approach speed. So it gives you the correct approach speed, and it all knows it's doing this type of landing. And this tells the GPWS, the Ground Proximity Warning System, hey, when they've selected 1520, that is their landing flap. Don't bother them anymore with undue warnings. And once you touch down, it automatically switches itself to 3040, as per the FCOM. Okay, so we're going to do a 3040 landing, but if you want to do a 1520, you select that, you flick that, and you make sure that you have the correct speed. Your pitch attitude is actually roughly the same, because you can see the approach speed is significantly higher for 1520. Yeah, it's just something that's available. It's all modelled. I think that is about it for the FMS. We've covered how you do a route, how you do a departure, how you put the SID, how you put the star, how you put the everything in. Things that we've got left to cover are direct twos, enabling alternates, what you do after you do a go around if you want to come back to land at your airport. It's fairly conventional because it's the same as what we changed it to, when we went to Birmingham. It's the same sort of thing. And yeah, I think that's about it. So well done if you made it this far, and this will be the end of the FMS lesson. Next one is we'll be setting up the FCU, setting up the rest of the aircraft, talking about how to do an engine start, doing an engine start, and getting on our way of this flight that's going to take us maybe a day or two of watching time to actually get somewhere that's only about 45 minutes away. But please join me back later on, and thank you very much for listening.